Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon to those of you here in Mountain Time and Central Time or on East Coast Time. Welcome to our special Earth Day Cannabis Sustainability Symposium. My name is Ben Gelt. I'm the founder and board chair of the Cannabis Certification Council. I just want to quickly thank all of you for being here with us today, and certainly also thank all of our sponsors. So starting with Boveda, our title sponsor, the humidity packs. They do great work in the industry and are passionate about so many issues, including sustainability. Big thank you to Boveda. Also want to thank Smoky's Cannabis Company here in Northern Colorado, Hawthorne GC, Grodan, Corrigan Cannabis Good, Fortis Consulting, Ceres Greenhouses, Stowe Responsible, Vicente Cederberg, Six Labs in Michigan and Illinois, the Marijuana Industry Group, the primary trade and lobby group for the cannabis industry here in Colorado, Solar Therapeutics, our great friends in Massachusetts, Gannett Fleming, a wonderful global engineering company, our friends here in Denver, Legal Services, our friends at the Stanley Brothers and Recreate, Silver Bullet Water Treatment, Rasky Partners, Green for Green. There's so many, Sana Packaging, and if I forgot any, please forgive me. Of course, our media partners at Marijuana Business Daily. So again, welcome. Thank you to all of you for joining us. Thank you to all of our sponsors for supporting us. And for those of you that are going to be watching the recording, thanks for tuning in via our YouTube channel or some other video opportunity. So today we're going to be doing a special Earth Day symposium on carbon and cannabis. We're joined by, I think, a really exciting lineup, starting with our special guest, DJ Kavam, who's going to be sharing a little bit about eco hip hop. We were listening to his music there at the top of the show. And then we've got two really great panels for you today, again, digging into carbon and cannabis. So the first one will be on carbon and agriculture. Will farming save the planet or destroy it? That panel will be moderated by our good friend, Zach Carson from Imagine All Events. He's also our executive producer. So for those of you in the event space looking for event support, Zach is a very talented individual. He will be joined on that panel, Carbon and Agriculture, by Kristen Murphy from the California Association of Resource Conservation Districts. She's the Agriculture Program Manager, and by Larry Copald, the co-founder of Carbon Underground. Very excited about that panel. And then the second panel will be strategies for indoor and outdoor cultivators to sequester carbon. That will be moderated by our friend and cannabis rock star from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, Caitlin Urso. And we'll be joined there by Cassandra Maffei, Daniel Stein, and Sunny Karcher from Ceres Greenhouses. They're not all from the series, but Sunny is. So again, I'm really excited about our lineup today, a special Earth Day Cannabis Sustainability Symposium. So with that, I'm going to turn it over now to our good friend, Rue Johnson from Rue Black, another sponsor and partner of the symposium. Rue is also a great friend and critical player for the council, doing all of our marketing and really helping me do the best that I can. Good morning, Rue.
Good morning, Ben. Thanks so much for handing it off. Great to see you.
I'm out of here. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I think we just need to move ETEF, DJ Kavam, up as a panelist. And while that's happening, I'll do a moment of housekeeping because it seems as though my neighbors upstairs are building Rome. And by building Rome, I mean doing something that involves lots of banging. So if you hear that, I can promise you that there is not a body in the wall or a random person in the wall. It's just some construction happening in the condo above me. So, okay, ETEF, there you are. Hi.
Word. Peace. What's happening?
It's good to see you. Okay, I hate to be like talking to production, but can we not share the screen so that we can see his whole essence? Okay, there we go. Okay, perfect. My name is Rue Johnson. This is DJ Kavam. I think formally we call you ETEF, but I've known you for so long that, you know, I call you my brother, of course.
Peace. What's up, family? You already know.
I already know. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. You know, shout out to the crew and the squad. I see y'all. What's happening?
So
Okay.
I want you to give us an introduction because, of course, I know who you are, and in many spaces, your name and your reputation sort of precede your work. But I would love for you to give us an overview of what you do in the eco space, and because you've been making some really incredible strides. So give us a brief intro.
Well, thank you for having me once more. Yeah, my name is Dr. Etef Vida. I have a PhD in urban ecology. I'm a permaculturalist, MC, producer, DJ, b-boy, occasional midwife. I do a lot of other things besides just teach kids how to grow food and pull up with a boom box and, show them how to scuff their shoes. But
Yeah.
I think the whole vibe right now is really just showing people culinary climate action, how to decolonize their kitchen, how to transform their life by using not only food as medicine, but more ideas of like wellness and like community development all together. So my newest work is more like social justice, social work. But I'm always in the community. I'm just doing it in different ways.
And I think one thing that is so important when you said like decolonize your kitchen, and when we talk about sustainability, when we talk about the earth, obviously it's Earth Day. A lot of people don't necessarily, maybe they should, but I don't think we see the version of you as a farmer and as a climate change activist. We don't necessarily see that version or that iteration on the news and in the world. And can you talk about like your history as someone who's been kind of an eco expert, and why it's important to continue seeing faces like yours and having voices like yours a part of the conversation, especially as the world changes?
Inclusivity has always been like a part of like how nature naturally grows, biodiversity is a part of like how you see the forest. And sometimes when it looks like, um, just trying to create that in communities around what sustainability looks like, most of the time people in the hood associate that with, some Birkenstock ass casts from like Boulder, real talk. And that's love. But at the end of the day, we have so many likes of people who are on the front line of sustainable movements. And sometimes that looks like the urban farmers, sometimes that looks like, these lowrider bike clubs. And sometimes that looks like, the unhoused community who are doing recycling. So it's about reframing and redefining the image of wealth in our culture. And what I really see, like having my own experience, I'm a farmer. You know what I mean? I grew up growing food. I was at the farmers market pushing greens, real talk, and it was fun. Now I got a chance to do that through music and through seeds, but so many different experiences from, making smoothies for the president all the way down to like experiencing different ways around the world of how people are suffering from poverty but have food access. And our differences are just mental construction of how we, visualize what poverty actually is. So it's about redefining the image of wealth. Um, and when I see this for like more young people, it's more than just myself who are taking their music and rapping about culinary climate action or, the issues of the planet, all the way down to KRS-One's beef. I sit on the shoulders of ancestors and elders. And I feel like as an artist, we have a big responsibility to continue the conversation of what social justice and using art for change looks like, and how to decolonize a kitchen looks like buying local, supporting your sustainable grocery stores, and trying to transform the ideas of our carbon footprint by literally buying food that doesn't have pesticides in it. You know what I mean? To the best of our ability, that we can educate each other about how we can prolong the life of the bees, transforming that all the way down to biomimicry. I can go on and on and on, but
I love it when
it's
you
a
go on
closed
and
cycle.
on. I love it when you go on and on. Okay, so let's talk about weed. So you're a farmer, and
Right.
cannabis is a plant, right? And the
Yeah, it
plant
is.
has to grow, but it also requires that there's all this other stuff that that has to happen, the lighting and the timing and the soil and the whatever. How, and we know that that plant is a medicine, right? How do we focus on, growing our herb more sustainably? How can we as consumers make sure that we are like smoking good, clean cannabis? How important is that? Because I know so much about what you do on a food justice level, and how we consume cannabis goes into our body and into the land. So how important are some of those same sustainability practices when it comes to how we're growing the plant?
I think it's the same way that we grow our food, you know what I mean? So it's like, on the real, petrochemicals and all that stuff, that's old school, you know what I'm saying? Composting, that's the way, you know what I'm saying? Like really using what's there, what's available in our land. Like, I get it. People want the buffalo to roam. I'm in the inner city. I'm trying to see the bees flourish. You know what I mean? So the conversation of what this looks like is like working with nature, using that biomimicry to actually like fortify the soil. Think soil first. You know what I'm saying? We take care of the soil, we take care of the whole world. You know what I mean? We got to change the microbes. We literally got to put the carbon right back into it. I'm all about putting like straight up charcoal, you know what I mean? Like anything from out of like the ashes, all that, put that back into the soil. You know what I mean? Mix that in. I think a lot of things that we can do is just remember some of the ancient wisdom, a lot of us understand that sunlight is the best. You know what I mean? We also understand that it's a huge carbon footprint from people growing indoors, and how that is straight up coming straight from the power plants. And not everybody has solar energy, but this is things that we can start taking into consideration going green forward. I love the fact that I'm from Colorado, where we legalized it first. See, that's just the idea on plant-based medicines. Think about all the other plants that can do the same thing. You know what I mean? Why stop there? You know what I mean? If we understand the fact of how many, beautiful transformations that we can get, without even just going through the whole produce section, I think that there's something to study right there, and something to pay attention to.
Yeah, 100%. That's so true. And I think the way that you explain it, and the way that your mind works in terms of how to get the message out to the people, that's why, Michelle Obama wanted you to come and like make smoothies for the family. That's why you're in Oprah magazine. That's why you're hanging out with Leonardo DiCaprio and like all this other really cool stuff that you do, right, for those people. But it's really about the message, and the message that you convey to the people about these important topics. And it brings up something someone put in the chat. I don't know if you can see it, but it says, artists are so important for long thinking and intergenerational connection. It's essential for sustainability. Thank you, Jack, for mentioning that, because it segues right into what I want to ask you, Etef. What is it about your message that makes it so accessible, and how can we continue to spread that message so that more people hear it? I know you're doing cool things like, your album is like a download link on a pack of, seeds, and just like all these other creative things. So talk about how your message is delivered and conveyed to the people.
Well, I mean, I started an organic seed company to be able to deliver and transform the same way that drugs were flooded in the hood, right? So I was like, great. I'm gonna be like the freeway Ricky Ross of seeds. You know what I'm saying? And just flood the whole hood with seeds. And I think that conversation is continuing to permeate, because, victory gardens are on the rise. Growing lawns is dead. You know what I'm saying? It's so passe and so colonial. That's a part of colonization that we need to let go. You know what I mean? It's growing grass, for real, you know? And so growing food is like something that our elders do. And a lot of us have the intergenerational dialogue, and you hold on to it while you can, because, some of us is dealing with the tyranny. A lot of us haven't found like the elders who want to prolong the life. And what I wanted to do is just be an artist who can like not just give you something that you can listen to, but I was like, all right, I'll go ahead and make a commercial for it. How many movies and commercials do we have for selling drugs in the form of music? But we can do the same thing for environmental sustainability, camaraderie and solidarity for, social justice movements. And that's kind of what I'm doing. I think the access is really about putting it directly in the hands of the people. So I've been donating seeds, just giving seeds to urban farmers in need. People, if they want to help me, they just go to my GoFundMe.com/Vita Earth. You can find out more about what I'm doing and the nonprofit I work with and the boards I sit on. But, you know, I'm a collaborator. I cross-pollinate, you know. The teams I work with is like Kiss the Ground, Earth Guardians, you know, Captive Planet Foundation. I'm trying to stay where the youth are, stay where the conversation are like really continuing to grow with this next generation. And you know, as you keep seeing it, you know what's up. I'm on Instagram. I'm always sprinkling recipes, you know what I mean? Putting hemp seeds on everything, you know. And I think that's the next wave. It's hemp this, hemp that, you know what I mean? Hemp concrete, you know what I'm saying? And
Yeah, hip freeways,
pushing
all
that.
of that. Yes, yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
you know. But you know, drink it. Drink your cannabis leaves, y'all. I
Okay.
put that in the pure juicer. Yo.
You put the weed in the juicer?
I put the leaves in a
Oh,
pure juicer, right? So it's kind of like a Norwalk. It broke down to the cellular wall. Yo, I mean that joint was so fly. It was the most dark green juice ever, and I just like the healing properties is in the stock. It's in the leaves. It's in the chlorophyll. Don't forget that. You know what I mean? You know, just I'm gonna say that to all the squad out there. Yo, drink your greens, player.
no, I love that because I know we're coming down the time, and I wish this conversation could continue, and I feel like we're gonna find a way to continue bringing this conversation to the masses. Also, KVIM's GoFundMe, we put that in the chat for everybody who's seeing that, and a way for you to follow his work. But you're always so like thousands of years ahead of how people are like operating with, like, now you're juicing your cannabis, which is like obviously I guess that's the next wave, which is really crazy. I want to just get this quick question in, so let's get your answer from it. We have about 3 minutes. So the question is, given 420 was yesterday, how do we ensure that those who are disproportionately impacted by the prohibition of cannabis can benefit from our collective actions as artists, creators, and creatives in the industry? How do we make sure we're bringing all the marginalized folks to the center?
Sure, reform. Let everybody out of jail who was caught up for slinging weed. That's one. Two, making sure that there is a profitable, subsidized opportunity for, you know, the same way they got for urban farmers, for people who grow cannabis, especially if they're in the inner city. Three, you already know. I think it's a whole conversation about how it's more than just decriminalized. It needs to be represented in a way that can be a part of our infrastructure, as far as like, you know, not just the Declaration of Independence. It's not just leave it there, but I'm saying for real, like it needs to be included into like these upcoming buildings and the whole conversation around like our health and wellness. It's a superfood. They playing games with us. So, you know, ancient medicine, you know what I'm saying, all day. We just, last thing I'll say straight up, we just need ancient wisdom for present problems. That's all we need, y'all. All this other stuff is just playing games. Don't let them play with you. You know what I'm saying? Real talk. I don't even take backs. I'll be on that stage and see the player.
It's so funny. Sage and Cedar. Okay. The other thing that people who's watching don't know is that he's so funny. Even though I know you're very serious, but you're also just like really funny and a character. So you put out a video. Did it come out yesterday or today? You always do something for Earth Day.
I just dropped a new video this morning called Pull Up on the Gate. Just premiered it on Sway in the morning. Shave 05 with the family, talking with Ice-T, you know, OG to OG about organic seeds and gardening. He was putting me on game too. I think you check out the videos on YouTube, Pull Up on the Gate, coming from my new album, Concrete Garden, dedicated to everybody in the inner city, because I already know how it is.
It's a crazy world. I wanted to let you know everybody in the chat is with you. Someone is saying free the man, support them like the farmers, and make it a part of the law and the infrastructure and the planning moving forward. Thank you so much to my friend, Etef, DJ KVIM, Dr. Etef, DJ KVIM, Vita, the true and real living gift. Thank you so much for the time. And because I know that you either just left the radio station or you're about to do something else for another interview. So I'm grateful for you. We'll share your video far and wide. Zach Carson, the producer. Are you coming in here, Zach? There is Zach looking fresh. I hope we get a view of the schnauzer today, the little puppy you have that I love. Thank you so much, Etef. And I'm going to hand the baton over to Zach as we continue for the Cannabis Sustainability Symposium, the Earth Day edition. Yes.
Yep, y'all know what's up. Follow me on Instagram, IETEF. Peace.
Thank you, DJ Cable. Pleasure to see you. Appreciate you being here and all the work you're doing. And Rue, thank you. You're amazing too. Happy Earth Day to everyone. My name is Zach Carson. I am the CEO of a company, Imaginal, where I work on experiential event marketing for values-driven brands in the cannabis industry and beyond. And I'm fortunate enough to be the executive producer of the Cannabis Sustainability Symposium, coming to you on Earth Day. I'm in Sonoma County, California, right near the Emerald Triangle, you know, home to some of the best sun-grown cannabis in the world. They say that close to 70% of the cannabis in the U.S. historically was grown in this region, about the size of Rhode Island, about 55,000 cannabis farmers up in the hills, and in some ways can be described as some of the first in the U.S. in our generation, homesteaders, off-the-grid livers, sustainable ag people, as they were sort of forced into growing under the trees, growing off the grid, maintaining their own soil, building their own compost, because they were forced to. They didn't have the ability to go to the store and buy their supplies. It was really original cannabis growers were doing it in a way that needed to be sustainable. So on Earth Day today, excited to be here. Coming up, I am on my phone because I just lost internet service. Max, do we have Larry and Kristen on the stage as well? Can you guys hear me?
I hear you, Zach. I am
okay, good.
Working on it. And
okay, well, it looks like Kristen's here. I see, and there's Larry. So just to get into it, our next panel is called Carbon and Agriculture. Will farming save the planet or destroy it? And, you know, we started out with DJ Cavum talking about really hip hop and the importance of education in our music, in our culture, in our cities. And this panel coming up featuring Larry Copal from Carbon Underground and Kristen Murphy from the California Association of Resource Conservation Districts. The intent of this is going to be sort of painting a high-level picture of carbon and agriculture, not necessarily specific to cannabis, but we felt it's sort of a higher level discussion on the importance of these two topics will pave the way for our next panel, which is going to focus a lot more specifically on cannabis. So to just dive right in, what we're going to be talking about today, and then I'll introduce our panelists, is while the industrial agriculture has enabled exceptional progress to occur since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, we now know that there have been serious unintended consequences. Much like the industrial production of energy, the scaling of certain practices has led to the degradation of land, loss of topsoil, threats to food security, poisoning of our food and water, and most urgency, climate change. The good news is the movement towards regenerative ag is catching on and is one of the best tools we have to restore soil health, which in turn will help draw down and sequester carbon back into the earth, one of the most significant contributors to climate change. During this panel, we're going to hear from speakers about how the industrial ag has contributed to the climate crisis, what resources and solutions are available to mitigate and reduce future damage. If the cannabis industry is to be a part of this solution, understanding the ramifications of our impact is critical. So without further ado, Larry and Kristen, you guys there with me?
It's Larry, I'm here.
Welcome, Larry. So, Larry, pleasure to see you. Thank you so much for your time. Brief introduction to Larry. Larry has been a communications and branding professional for over 25 years, and he's worked with some of the top advertising agencies. He's overseen advertising for brands such as McDonald's to American Express to Honda. He's also helped launch multi-billion-dollar brands like Acura, Oracle, and Huggies. Larry has been a lifelong environmentalist who served on the boards such as Oceana, the National Marine Sanctuary, 1% for the Planet, and others. He's also helped with environmental communications for the UN and the Olympics, and his work for Earth Communications Office was seen in over 100 countries by over 1 billion people. He's been nominated for both Emmy and Grammy Awards. A friend and a hero. Larry, welcome to the stage.
Wow, where did you get that bio? That's crazy. It's really good to be here. It really is. And first thing I want to do is I want to thank DJ. That music, whew, that was amazing. I mean, I'd rather take me off and listen to more of that, to be really honest, but phenomenal. So if you're listening, thank you for that. Great to be here. I'll let you introduce Kristen.
Yeah,
we'll
thank you. And pleasure to have Kristen Murphy, who is joining us from the California Association of Resource Conservation Districts. And if you don't know about resource conservation districts, they're an amazing asset to our agriculture community. Kristen will tell us more about it. But Kristen joined the agricultural district in California in 2016 and has since been enthralled in facilitating and advocating for their work. Kristen manages CARCD's climate beneficial programs, explores conservation for newly legalized cannabis operations, manages outreach for historically underserved producers, and leads conference event planning for the org. Kristen has worked through the food system for over 10 years, including organic farming, ag, environmental ed, food justice, and food service. She serves her community by sitting on the steering committee of the Sacramento Food Policy Council. Kristen strives to create more equitable and ecological paradigms. She holds a BS from the University of California, Davis in sustainable ag and food systems with an emphasis in food and society. Pleasure to have you here and thrilled that you are here as a part of this conversation.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to join. And it's a little unfair to have my bio read after Larry, so I'm not sure about that.
Well, the beautiful thing about this whole day is we have amazing all-stars with depth of work and expertise to share. So thank you both for being here. Just to get us started, I read a bio, and it's from the horse's mouth is always a little bit better in terms of the work you're doing. So maybe we can start off with you, Kristen, then move to Larry. Tell us a little bit about the work you are doing and why it's so important to you right now.
Sure. Well, as I told Zach yesterday, cannabis and carbon on farms are my favorite two topics. So I'm so excited to be here talking about my work and the work of the resource conservation districts here in California. So the resource conservation districts are technical assistance providers that provide direct on-the-farm technical assistance to any kind of land manager. So that could be foresters, people who have wetlands, and then I'm working specifically in the agricultural part. So we're looking at all different kinds of agroecosystems and rangelands. Ooh, sounding choppy? Let me see.
Kristen, maybe mute and unmute yourself.
I'm going to see without headphones. How's that?
That is better.
Better.
Awesome. Okay. So the resource conservation districts provide direct technical assistance on farms to farmers to be able to assist in any way with resource concerns and to really improve general stewardship on the land. So for me, that means that I am supporting the technical assistance providers themselves, making sure that they have the resources they need, the training, the funding, et cetera, to be able to be the best support for our agricultural producers. So specifically, as Zach mentioned, I'm looking at a lot of climate beneficial ag, which in this case is definitely talking about carbon sequestration into soil. And then also looking at other different ways and mechanisms to look holistically at our land to make sure that it's going to be adaptive and resilient in the face of climate change. So at the bottom of the day, I think about soil health as really being that fundamental building block of life. There's microbial communities in there, there's the plants above it, and then we've got the air with the carbon, right? Which we've got a little bit too much of. So we're trying to really draw that down. So the work that I'm doing is working with these technical assistance providers throughout the state of California to be able to do the best work they can with farmers to say, okay, you've got this specific piece of land in this specific area. So each place is going to have different kinds of nuances. So we have that locally specific information, and then develop plans to be able to identify the best either management styles for farming practices or different kinds of practices that you could implement onto your farm to be able to not only draw down that carbon into the soil, but also to be able to create better water quality, water holding capacity in your soil, to increase biodiversity, to be able to perhaps manage some fuel load so that way the carbon doesn't escape through the fires that are happening all over California and many other places in the world, really. So that's a highlight of what I'm doing. And I'm really excited that we are kind of moving that into all different kinds of agroecosystems, which certainly includes cannabis.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kristen. California is so agricultural based. We are a huge state, and there's issues of fire and water shortages, and obviously big contributors in our industry to carbon. And the support that our farmers and our ag people need is immense right now. So we appreciate the work you're doing. Larry, can you paint a picture of what you're doing, Carbon Underground and beyond?
Sure, happy to. And Kristen, you're a hero, so just know that. You're the ones getting it done. So I want to first answer your question. That's sort of the name of this, which is, will farming save or destroy the planet? The answer is yes. And then if you ask me which one it's going to be, I would say, I guess we're going to find out. So what am I doing? Why am I doing it? Why did I make this massive life shift, which I really didn't? And I can explain that a little bit more. But I want to sort of answer this by throwing some numbers out. You don't need to write any of these down, but there's going to be a lot of them. The first one is 1552 2 billion. And let me explain what that means. I was on the board of Greenpeace for 10 years. And we hosted a Greenpeace board retreat in Costa Rica, and we brought down some of the top climate scientists in the world, the ones that are always on the news, to give us an update on the climate. And they all said the same thing independently. Every one of them said, we have 15 years left. We're past the point of no return. The natural systems are going to break. Bedlam is going to happen, and there's go home and hang out with your family. If you want to work on this stuff, that's great, but it's not going to matter. Terrific. They went home. We all got suicidal. Let me make it worse. And I promise you I'm going to dig out of this. I promise. It's important to take the journey. So around the same time, the UN came out with a report that said, at the rate we are destroying our topsoil, and we've degraded or destroyed as much as 70% of it, we have 60 harvests left on Earth. And that applies to anything you want to be growing in soil. But we have 60 harvests left, and it's game over. Now, the third number in there was 2 billion. The Pentagon had, about 10 years ago, came out with a study that said they think by 2035, there's going to be 1 billion environmental refugees on Earth. People who had to uproot, move because there was no food or water, or both, where they're living. They have now doubled that to 2 billion. This is all scary shit, obviously. Now I'm going to throw some other numbers at you. I think the right order would probably be 1 trillion and 8 and 12.5 billion. Here's what I mean by that. So we have, Christian said a second ago that we've got a little too much carbon in our atmosphere. We've moved 1 trillion tons of carbon from our soil to our atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution. 1 trillion tons, okay? So, and that legacy carbon, that stuff up there, has to be dealt with. Nobody talks about this, which is what we're trying to change, but that has to be dealt with as much as reducing new emissions has to be dealt with. And so we'll talk about that. But here's the beauty. There are 12.5 billion acres of land around the world used for agriculture. 12.5 billion acres that can be improved and start drawing down more carbon. I see the scientist nodding her head, which I love, that can be drawn down to literally reverse climate change. It takes about 8 months once you begin restoring the health of soil for it to start drawing carbon back down. That's an average. It depends on how bad the soil is. But that's astonishing. So when you look at that and you do those numbers, you go, my God, we can really start to make a big difference in the opposite direction that climate change is going. And I'll leave you with one other number, and then I'll tell you what we're doing about all this, which is 7,000. This is the most hopeful thing I know of for the future. Anybody who looks at climate change today looks at the number of parts per million, right? And that's how many molecules of CO2 are in the atmosphere. For life on Earth to be good, it should be around 280. It's about 400, and actually, I think it's 420. So how's that for serendipity? So we need to get it back to 280. All we talk about is how do we keep it from going to 500 or 600. We need to go backwards on that. And here's something amazing. So the Earth has been as high as 7,000 parts per million before we were here. We didn't do that. Volcanoes and fires and things like that did that. And every time that happened, all nature did was say, you know, this photosynthesis thing that pulls carbon out of the atmosphere and gives it to plants so they can have something to use to eat. Well, that also feeds those microorganisms in the soil that Kristen was talking about. And so repeatedly, nature has taken the planet from 7,000 back to 280. We think it's really easy to get her to go from 420 to 280. So that's what we're working on. So the carbon underground is really working on the second half of solving climate change. So we can talk about reducing emissions to zero all we want. You know what it does? Zero. And that's not me talking. That's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. That's Nobel Prize winners on this who have said that if we had a magic wand and we waved it right now, and we got emissions down to nothing, zero, you know, we no more fossil fuels, cows stop belching and farting, I guess, but it's really the belching. No more emissions. The legacy carbon in the atmosphere will continue to degrade the atmosphere for 1,000 years. So we're not going to be here in 1,000 years. And I mean that existentially and more immediately. So we're not going to be here if we do not draw that legacy carbon back down. So that's the absolutely essential other half of dealing with climate change. The really good news, we might have known all this for a long time, but here's the really amazing news, and then I promise I'll shut up, is we know that there's lots of solutions to problems in the world that don't get done for political reasons or this, or people are lazy or whatever it is. Here's the beauty of the soil. The soil is not only what ITEF talked about, how it supports everything on Earth. It does, without question. But you know what else it supports? It supports the biggest industry in the world, the food industry, $7.7 trillion. It supports the fiber industry, $3.5 trillion. And it's collapsing on them. And they need to shore it up for their business. So if we can go to them and say, this is going to help your business, and they go, that's pretty cool. I think maybe you've convinced us we ought to do this. We know that we're restoring soil, we're drawing carbon down, we're creating more justice around the world by supporting the 2 billion people around the world that grow our food, more than half of them women. And that's why you have companies, you know, Mars is spending $1 billion to move to regenerative agriculture. Pepsi announced yesterday they're going to restore 7 million acres. These announcements are happening every day. And you know what? They're not doing it for climate change. They're doing it for their business. And that, to me, is hopeful. And you know, I was on the board of Greenpeace, as I said, and Greenpeace never taken a penny from corporations. You know what? That's great. It's not that I'm not talking about taking money. It is that corporations have the biggest levers in the world. And the cannabis industry is growing into a really big industry. And I'm chomping to have a conversation about that, because it's an industry I've been involved in for, well, since I was 13 in one way or another. But there's a lot of amazing, exciting things going on, and there's some really big concerning things going on as it grows up. So I will be quiet now.
Larry, thank you. That was a great overview, not just what Carbon Underground, but why Carbon Underground really exists. And, you know, the problems and the solutions are available. And I was going to mention the same things you did with what HP is committing to, and what, you know, Pepsi just announced. We have businesses that have shifted their behavior because it's affected their bottom line. And we're watching a slow trickle where consumer demand has pushed a lot of those companies to be better. And now they're seeing, not just from consumers, but they're seeing their supply chains in jeopardy to maintain their business. And that's a big part of the solution, and great tie back into cannabis. But so thank you both for that intro. I just want to maybe take a couple minutes here to get a little basic. I think there's a lot of assumptions we make of how carbon gets into the atmosphere, how agriculture and commercial ag could be a problem, and why that's contributing. I want to just like dumb down our assumptions and paint a little picture of some of the problems of that traditional agriculture, the monocropping, and what the problems are with that. And if we could just touch on that, I think it'll help us move forward into sort of some of the solutions that exist, and why this is so critical within the ag world. So Kristen or Larry, you know, Kristen, maybe start us off. You know, I think you can paint a picture. It's kind of why your organization exists now, is helping ag with solutions. But why is that so important right now? And why has the traditional forms of agriculture got us to where we are?
Yeah, thank you. And Larry, thank you so much for that amazing context about climate change and about agriculture. So, you know, I think about the two main carbon sinks on Earth. And one of them is the ocean, and that is the largest one. The ocean is the biggest part of the Earth, right? And that is not where we want the carbon to go. So if we are drawing down carbon, as has been explained by Larry of why we need to do that, it cannot be going in the ocean, but needs to go back into our soils. So I think that what Larry was saying about the importance of realizing that agriculture, it's not, or climate change solutions in general, are not just about reducing emissions. That just means that we stay where we are, right? We need to actually be able to mitigate that. And since the soil is the second largest carbon sink on Earth, that is where it needs to go. So I like to think a lot about the soil health principles. So I work with the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service very often. The resource conservation districts were created in tandem, and we were actually created in tandem out of the Dust Bowl, which you know, was a major loss of topsoil across the U.S. and you know, major hindrance to the ecologic and economic viability of farmers and ranchers everywhere. And of course, as Larry mentioned, also the loss of production of food, which feeds the world. So the RCDs and the NRCS, they were made to be focused on soil and how do we make sure not to continue to lose our topsoil. And topsoil is where the life in the soil is, the majority of it. That's where the majority of that microbial activity that happens in symbiosis with the plants there that are drawing down the carbon from the atmosphere. So when I think about how they're connected, the USDA and scientists across the world talk about the principles as being biodiversity, no disturbance in the soil, or the least amount you can make, living roots in your soil, and always keeping it covered. It's a little more comfortable. And So I think about the opposite of that too, the flip side. What is agriculture doing to either make that happen or to not be adhering to those principles? So I think about the biodiversity part. And if I'm thinking about the health of, and I'm thinking biodiversity of plants, of native species, of wildlife, of pollinators, of, again, those soil microbes, right? We need to be able to keep them alive and thriving, to be able to create a healthy ecosystem that functions appropriately, to be able to both draw down that soil through the production of plants, forage, trees, etc., and then also to be able to have those other kinds of redundancies and the ecosystem benefits that would assist in higher drought tolerance of our land, being able to be more adaptive if there's drought or if there's flooding. I think about the soil disturbance as the most major release of carbon dioxide from the soil. If the carbon is stored in the soil, every time we till the soil, carbon is being released. And we're also killing those microbial communities in the soil, giving them a very unhospitable place to be. And then, of course, not letting there be permanent plant structures there or root structures in the soil for that wildlife and habitat to be existing either, whether that's on your farm buffer or directly in the field where you're planting. And then lastly, again, those living roots. When you have those living roots in your soil, that means that you're going to have those microbes in there. That means you're going to have the kind of porosity in your soil that allows gas exchange to happen. Gas exchange sounds a little complicated. In this context, I'm really talking about being able to have room in there for the carbon to get down into the deep layers so that way it stays in the soil where it's supposed to belong. And then keeping it covered, right? Maybe that's actually 5. I don't know where I am in my list. You want to keep your soil covered because without having something on top of your soil, the carbon's just going to be able to trickle on up and bubble on out and go back into the atmosphere. So when I'm out looking at farms and I see what's happening, I drive down the 5 here in California and I see orchards, I see whatever's out my window. Those are kind of the things that I'm looking for. And I'm thinking, okay, if these are here or these aren't there, then I know how that farm is being, the level of resiliency it might have, the amount of carbon that it's able to be drawing down. And for me, the way I look at it, the areas of improvement that we could be doing to be able to mitigate climate change and be able to be making a world, a landscape that's actually sustainable for us to hopefully get past the 60 years that Larry mentioned, because that's a little nerve-wracking. I'm only in my 30s. I'm born in the mid 80s. I'll hope perhaps be alive in 60 years and would like to keep on eating. So
They said that 8 years ago. Not to
okay.
not to put my business.
Well, thank you, Kristen. Anything else, Larry, from your perspective? I think it was so interesting to hear you just say that, Kristen, because I picture driving down the 5 and I picture all the signs about water fights, and I look at all the fields that have, just monocrop. There's trees, but there's nothing growing under the trees. Everything's dry, and it's it is interesting just to be able to visually understand land management's ability to sequester or not sequester carbon. Larry, from your perspective, how are you seeing that? Some of those problems. I know deeply about issues, and DJ Cabum touched on the issues of pesticide use and the monocropping and the commercialization of food. It's been required, almost a shitty pathway we've taken to maintain a growing population. But what are those impacts other than what we talked about? Why is that happening?
Well, there's a lot packed in there. Couple things. Couple things. First thing I want to do is say that there is nothing we can do to positively affect more of the giant problems facing the world than restoring our soil. And I'll give you a perfect example. You talked about the signs, talking about the importance of irrigation should be supported. We need water for our crops. Yeah, we do need water for our crops. Let me tell you one amazing statistic, because one of the major benefits of restoring soil is it restores our fresh water supply. And when you increase the carbon in the soil, when you pull it back from the atmosphere you put it in the soil to do what it's been doing for 500 million years. Here's what happens to water. Right now, when you have dead soil or degraded soil and it rains, the water can't get through the soil. It's hard, it's compact, and it washes off. It goes into the lakes and in the rivers, and it takes with it all of the chemicals that are making that soil dead. Okay, so just think about that for 1 second. If you restore the health of the soil and underground, the carbon is able to contribute to the growing of humus, those become water sponges. This is how nature works things. And every 1%, here goes another number, every 1% of carbon that we restore to the soil stores 25,000 gallons of water per acre. Now, remember what I said about 12.5 billion acres of land used for agriculture? 25,000 gallons per acre that will not be needed to come in from irrigation because you will have a water battery inside. That's astonishing. So it solves our fresh water. You know what else it does? It grows healthier food. There's just no way if you're getting the chemicals out of the food, first of all. Second of all, because nature is back involved, you're growing more nutritious food, that people become healthier. UCLA reached out to us in their global health department, and they said, we want to work with you guys because we think restoring soil is the single most important thing we can do to reduce healthcare costs around the world. It could reduce 25%, like off the top, which is $5 trillion a year that governments would have to put into other things like social justice and renewable energy and renewable food, which is really what we're talking about here. So the motivations for doing it are from the macro climate change, water, human health, to the micro. We have, as I said, 2 billion people on Earth who are growing our food. Most of them are small stakeholder farmers. Almost all farmers on Earth right now are suffering financially. It's a mess out there. It is the #1 job in the world leading to suicide because of the failure of farms. And they're failing because big ag has got them hooked on heroin that they need more every year. They're failing because there are certain corporations crushing the price they're paying them. But they're also failing because their soil is disappearing. Topsoil washes off in the rain. And so there's a lot of reasons, not just social justice and equity, but all of these things become improved when we restore it. And I want to, Kristen talked about the importance of biodiversity, and we all hear that, we all know that. So, when you walk into a forest, and I'm talking to everybody now, we all go into forests and feel the difference. You get out of your car coming from an urban environment or a cornfield in Iowa. I don't care. They're both as biologically dead as can be. And you walk into a forest, it refreshes you. Why does it refresh you? It refreshes you because you're back into the Ubuntu, if you know that word, of biodiversity, where all species feed off one another, and it's not just what you're eating, it's the energy, it's everything, and we feel that. We understand that. So do the other species. So and by the way, I'm still challenging anybody to show me a monocropped forest. It's impossible, can't exist. So nature doesn't work that way. So, to Kristen's point in your question, we've got to stop monocropping, #1, which is kind of easy and kind of wonderful, as it not only restores the soil and the water and all of that, but it often gives additional revenue streams to the farmer because they're growing other crops that they can sell. So that's really great. And by the way, I know we're talking to the cannabis industry right now, and this is really what you're interested, but if you are not seriously paying attention to what Kristen is saying, and hopefully I'm supporting here, and you're growing in a farm, which is a whole other discussion than a greenhouse or a warehouse or that, which also love to have. But if you're not doing this, if you're not doing it regeneratively, here's what's going to happen. And and every one of you, I'll go on live TV to have you beat me up if I'm wrong on this. Every one of you is going to see your farm going to decline, because we have the history on what happens when you don't grow in a way that allows nature to regenerate itself and perpetuate itself and work in the only way that it stays healthy. So if there's one lesson to get out of this, it's make sure that you are growing in a regenerative way. It's going to affect all of these things, but it's also going to affect sort of the standing of the industry at a really critical time when you're trying to get policy and support behind you. And so it's another reason to do things the right way. Even the big ag guys are starting to understand that. So.
Yeah. Thank you, Larry, and thank you for tying it back in. I'm seeing, just to address a few comments out there, people are asking, what's good to plant with cannabis to include biodiversity. And just to let you know, our next panel that will be coming up, we do have a farmer who's, sun-grown, deep into regenerative ag, Daniel Stein from Bryceland. We also have a greenhouse, and we also have an indoor grower. And the realities of our cannabis industry is that there is no trade, interstate trade. I started by saying 70% of the cannabis in the U.S., used to be supplied by California. But the reality is that legally in the rec market, we can't take that cannabis and bring it to Michigan, bring it to Florida. And the realities in those climates is they don't have the ability to grow outdoor. So whereas regenerative outdoor cannabis is where we want to push the industry and where the industry needs to go, that next panel will address those ideas and also solutions for greenhouse and indoor to, as much as possible, reduce that carbon through different strategies and technologies. We want to be realistic, as much of us has said, in the realities of how this is growing. It's not just going to see regenerative farming across the board, but this will hopefully give those people further information as to the topic and the importance. So,
if I could just interrupt, I didn't mean to say those things are not part of what's on the table. I'm a big fan of urban agriculture for the exact same reasons you just talked about. But part of this is the more overall approach that we're taking, and it's also support for policy change that you just mentioned.
Yeah, and that's the point of this panel prior to the next one, which is going to be focused on cannabis. I was just addressing those questions. So I think we've done a good job so far of learning about, obviously what each of you do, the larger issues as carbon relates to climate change, how agriculture, monocropping, pesticides are destroying soils, the importance of soil health. I've learned a lot, and I've been studying this for 20 years. So this has been awesome. Let's move into sort of the next phase, which are some of the solutions that are going on out there. Obviously, Larry, you started off by talking about HP and I talked about HP. You talked about Pepsi and some of the, the alcohol and the beer industry is identified in their, impact reports that they need to change their water usage or they're not going to have a supply chain in the next 10 years. So there's the corporate thing, which I would like to get into, but from a sort of from a regenerative policy or regenerative program perspective, maybe each of you can tell me one or two programs that are going on right now that you're really excited about, whether they have already a lot of traction and you find them to be one of the most important levers or trim tabs to the new sort of regenerative economy, or that need some more support and you think they're out there. So either one of you can start. I'd love to hear from the both of you.
I'll jump in. You brought up the corporate examples, and so I'm gonna go beyond those if I can for a second. So I did say that the Carbon Underground was formed by people who understood business because we understood the importance of this to businesses, and by helping them would help us, the planet, all of us. But I want to talk about two programs that we're involved in that are very different, because the tripod of a movement, and something as big and pervasive and important as changing how we grow food, is a three-legged stool, and it's going to be corporations, and it's going to be governments, and hopefully it's going to be the people. And I don't, you know, I don't mean to minimize the people in that. It's critical that we get to the point where they actually have something they can do. I'm not talking about an individual who wants to grow something regenerative. I'm talking about the people. And there really hasn't been a whole lot that they could do up to this point. We couldn't ask them to go into a grocery store and buy regenerative the way you buy fair trade or buy organic. The industry hasn't matured to that point yet. There isn't the supply, so you're not seeing that. Very, very, very limited availability. We're working to change that. So I'm going to give you a government example. We were called by the Ministry of Thailand a year and a half ago, and they said, you know, our soil is dead. It's really important to us. We're a Buddhist nation. We really care about our 35 million farmers. And can you restore soil? Can you really do that for us? And so we went over there and we said, yeah, we can do that. But we said, here's what you need to do. You need to invest in the education and training of your farmers so they understand how to convert from industrial, chemically dependent techniques to regenerative techniques. And the reason you have to do that is because I can't go to Danone or McDonald's or Unilever or General Mills and say, come over to Thailand because they're going to grow some regenerative stuff. They'll go, well, we're doing that already. You know, what's different about them? And what's different about them is that they're going to pay to fix their house. And we said, if you do that, you will become the leader in regenerative agricultural production. And they agreed to that. And now it's a year and a half later, and we have about 20 major companies that we're working with that we have brought to Thailand to literally take the 6th largest producer or exporter of food of any country on earth and make it regenerative. That's astonishing, because what that will do is, if it succeeds, and we're in pilots, but we've got crops coming over that are now regenerative already, but if it really scales and succeeds, it's the domino that will force other countries to do the same thing, or they're going to lose their agricultural business. So that's pretty cool. So now let me flip to the other side. Let's talk about the people. So the United Nations came out with a study 2 years ago that said there are more than 2 billion people on Earth that share these 3 characteristics about climate change. They're extremely concerned. They have no idea how they can make a difference, and they have the ability to do something. So we've created a program, and I'm saying this, I want everybody hearing this, if you believe it, help us push it out. It's called Adopt a Meter, and it's really simple. For $5, or the local equivalent, you can adopt a square meter of degraded soil, and we restore a square meter of degraded soil, and it starts pulling carbon back down and reversing climate change. We've been in soft launch. We're going big on Mother's Day for Mother Earth, but we've been in soft launch, and we've already adopted enough meters and granted that money to restore 100 million meters of land. Now, that's not going to solve the problem. We got to get up into billions and billions and billions and billions. But the amazing thing is how people are responding to this. And so that's the kind of thing that starts to sort of, everybody has a part in this movement. And so, you know, as I said, Mother's Day, all the proceeds is going to help female-owned farms in the US and India and Costa Rica. We've got our partners, they're unbelievable, but this is how it's going to happen. This is what we're going to do. And so we're going to need all of that. So the corporations are critically important, because they have the power. They're going to say, I'll buy that or I won't buy that. But governments have the capacity, and it doesn't have to be Thailand. It can be Santa Barbara, who's looking to create a resilient community by saying, we're going to make sure the soil everywhere around us is healthy, whether it's in the park or the farms that surround us, so that we can continue to produce food and have fresh water in our streams and rivers. So it's an all-in approach.
Hey, Larry, do you think you could put the link to that program in the chat box? And we'll also help you promote that from the Certification Council. We'll share that out there for our network of people to get it out there.
I'll put the Adopt-A-Meter website in. It's changing before this whole thing launches, but it's all there, and watch the video and you'll get it all. But thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I mean, that's beautiful work. It's got to be, we got to start thinking in systems, and thinking in systems is not just an ecological perspective of that, but it's the government, it's the business, it's the local community, it's the local governments, it's our farming practices. And it's, I think personally, part of what has driven this movement into the corporate sphere, besides just climate change affecting supply chain, is the growth of consumer awareness, and consumer drive has pushed companies to change. And we've seen that in the natural products industry, and I'm hoping we can see that in the cannabis industry today, because as you are offering people or consumers the ability to invest $5 to do metering, consumers have the ability to reinvest their money. We vote with our dollar, and we should be supporting companies who are on the cutting edge. We are dwindling down in time, so Larry, please share that and we'll get that out there. Kristen, I would love to hear, Larry's painting some very global pictures and some meta information. He's involved in problems and solutions on those levels. And you're really focused in California right now. And it's really critical that we're working directly with, one of the largest ag producers in the world is California. And we also have fires and we also have water, but there are amazing programs going on to support them. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those programs for the ag community and your farmers that you are really excited about?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to kind of start on that by adding a little bit to what Larry was saying and the work that we're working on in California with that as well, because you're absolutely right. I think one of the things that's in the top of my mind all the time is how do we make a private and public partnership to really be able to scale up the adoption of climate beneficial practices to be able to sequester carbon into the soil again. So, the RCDs are actually local government. We're special districts. If you're not in California, conservation districts are national. So if you're in Colorado, if you're in Oregon, if you're in Alaska, if you're in Washington, they have conservation districts there too. Not sure that they're all working in cannabis, but they will certainly be able to provide you information and resources on general kinds of land management for the discussion that we're having today. So we've already got this little local government piece, the little piece that I'm working on with it, but we work with the state of California, we work with the federal agencies, and there is not enough money to go around to be able to actually implement the practices and change the management style of farmers and ranchers to be able to have this holistic, climate beneficial management on their farms. So I've been really driven to be working more in that realm, right? In a variety of different ways. How can we either get corporate dollars down to the farmers if it is a separate kind of industry? But also, Larry mentioned that there isn't a label right now for you to be able to have your purchasing power and get some regenerative made chocolate, right? There's fair trade, there's organic, that's awesome. It's gonna happen. It's slowly creeping. It's part of the private partnerships that we're working on here in California. So for instance, some of you may have heard of FiberShed, and that is working with resource conservation districts who write carbon farm plans. Hemp is absolutely included in there, and it will give a better value to, if you're a FiberShed producer, you end up getting a better value for your product, whether that may be hemp, maybe that's wool, maybe it's flax, and then selling it at that premium to be able to further incentivize the continued holistic management that one would be doing on their farm or ranch. I've just started working with Planet Forward. They're a new startup in the Bay Area here. I'm really excited about them. Like Larry said, it's woman-led, and I'm stoked about that as well. And they are trying to work with us to see how they can source. It's not even just going to be an apple, right? They're looking at consumer packaged goods and being able to source the ingredients for that from regenerative farms. these are in its infancy, and I'm very excited about the direction that it's going, especially with, again, that partnership. How are we able to leverage the, local citizens and government, especially federal now these days, luckily, are considering climate change more. How do we put those all together so that way it actually affects and makes the impacts on the ground that we need? A really great example that I'm excited to share with you too is something that we're actually working on with a cannabis farm in the Emerald Triangle in Northern California. And we are, a cannabis organization reached out to us. And so now we will do a pollinator program on a lot of their different family farms. That is not necessarily with the idea of sequestering carbon, but it's going to do that anyway, because we're adding biodiversity, we're adding soil cover, we're going to be reducing the amount of synthetic chemicals and inputs, because as Larry mentioned, that's either going to come off as runoff. It is, going to perhaps harm the pollinators and insects that are needed to have that healthy ecosystem. So that's another way of just making those small relationships, working with us to be able to get that information and those practices on the ground. Some of the other work, though, we have built a carbon farming network here in California. It's primarily with the resource conservation districts, but we have a lot of other partners as well, certainly including, again, the NRCS, the Cooperative Extension, and other NGOs too. So with that, we are training our technical assistance providers, those that go onto the farm and help farmers and ranchers make those most sustainable practices and choices and that are appropriate for their landscapes. And we write those plans and we work together. We're also doing peer-to-peer learning. So I guess I'm really excited about everything. I think I've said that many times, but again, like I said at the beginning, I'm really into cannabis and carbon sequestration. So it's all moving to me. But yeah, we've seen that for farmers, and perhaps some of you are farmers on this call, and from yourself that it's really interesting to see what your neighbor's doing. What's working for them? What's not working for them? What are they thinking about? And it's nice to have that regionally, because then they are your neighbors. Maybe they have a similar ecosystem. Maybe they have a similar soil type or climate, right? Lots of different microclimates. The way marijuana grows in Colorado is probably different than it is in greenhouse in India in California. So we are connecting people together to have peer-to-peer learning communities. And we're moving away from the model of just information distribution of saying, this is what you need to do, this is how you make improvements. But instead, you all are the farmers. Your land. You've been watching it for however long you've been there. Maybe you're a new farmer and you've been there for a year. Maybe you're a 5th generation farmer and you've been there for 150 years. You know that land better than anybody else. So how do we empower you to acknowledge the wisdom that you already have? Your goals are the same as mine, which are enhanced stewardship. How do we make your piece of farmland continue to provide the resources that your family needs and that the community needs by both the medicinal and recreational product that you all are making, right? I want the same things. So I think about that often. How do we just tie that all together and help people recognize that you often already have the information that you need to be able to do the right practices? I don't even want to say the right practices, the practices that will most enhance your farm. The other thing that I'm thinking about a lot too is Indigenous land management. The United States of America here was sustainable before colonization happened. We were able to feed, clothe everybody that was here before. So, we are all on different stolen sovereign lands, and I would absolutely encourage all of you to reach out to your local tribes, to any indigenous people that are native to your area, and see, do you have suggestions? How can we work here together? What is the traditional ecological knowledge that you know and have used and applied on your land before, to be able to continue to make that kind of ecosystem connection and woven in? I think a lot about food and farming sovereignty, right? for farmers to be able to grow what they want, to be able to grow that effectively, and really for that whole community health and development and well-being. And I think that making sure that we are providing the resources to small farmers, to underserved producers, and then also to be able to make sure that we're getting the perspectives of what has worked. We know that the way that agriculture has occurred after the Green Revolution is not been successful. This is why we're in the agricultural situation that we are, and that Larry has highlighted so well the issues of. So, we talk about permaculture. That system is, comes from traditional ecological knowledge. So being able to integrate that style of management back into our systems, and to be able to have that kind of perspective and thinking about, it's not us versus nature or our farm, but that we are all together in a system. People have always been part of the food and farming system, right? From the very, very beginning. So how do we make sure that we're able to tie that all back together?
Yeah, you heard of that. For those in cannabis and agriculture or farmers on this call right now, I mean, as Kristen had said, RCDs are such an amazing resource that are most likely really undervalued in our industry. I worked at Flocana, and we were redeveloping the old Fetzer winery into a campus around tourism and cannabis, and we worked directly with the RCDs up there because we were planning a large development project up there, and the RCDs were helping us be a big part of that plan. We have some really critical streams running through that. We have roads nearby. We have natives that live there, and they help paint that picture for what we need to know. And I've worked with them in different areas in California on a variety of projects. So definitely check that out. We are, have a couple more minutes, and I want to get into some closing remarks. Thank you both for this. I think the important message, or there's so many freaking important messages here. It's only the most important messages of our existence. As it relates to cannabis, I mean, there's so much to learn, and we don't have to start from square one. There's so much to learn from the big companies that are transitioning into more sustainable and regenerative practices and the reasons they did that. And we're seeing the growth of monocropped cannabis in massive farms so people can get as much money and as much market saturation as possible quickly. And as Larry said, we want to look out for those, witness the, we've seen the future, and let's not be blind to what other industries have shown us. We've seen the future of labels and how consumers have driven markets into more sustainable practices. And Sun and Earth is one label we're going to talk about, which is a regenerative certification in the cannabis industry. How do consumers play a role in influencing companies? How do companies play a role in ensuring more sustainable practices? And how do we all, as a human society and a living society, contribute to more positive things? Again, the cannabis industry is set to be one of the biggest industries on the planet, definitely in this country. And we need to take these lessons and learn these lessons. So to close for a couple minutes, Larry and Kristen, maybe you could just leave us with kind of the same points I was talking about, which is, what are your biggest hopes and goals and dreams for the cannabis industry to take away from these conversations right now? We have about 4 minutes total to address these. So let's go 2 minutes each. What's your wishes for the cannabis industry?
Go for it, Kristen.
Well, I think that having access to land is a privilege. And I think that having that access means that you can be part of being the solution for climate change and for, equally distributed resources, whether that is the medicine that you may be growing, or like Larry said, you actually are growing a different crop as well to be able to add to your income and to be able to feed your community, whatever that might look like. There is so much room for us to grow and to be able to work together and collectively. There are folks like Larry, Zach, and I right here, definitely the people coming on next as well, that are working for this. So reach out to us because we want to be doing this together. I know that for me, partnerships are certainly the most important. We are certainly more than the sum of our parts when we work together. I also just want to quickly shout out to Sarah Letton, who's my colleague and works more directly on our cannabis products program. And she's also put in a couple really cool links. One of them is for a sustainable certification and self-assessment for cannabis growers as well. If you're a Californian farmer, it's also tied directly to regulation. So that way you know that you're meeting compliance at the same time as being the best steward of your land as you can be. So there's a link in there. You can take a look at that. Give us a call if you have questions, want to make improvements. We're here for you.
Thank you so much, Kristen. And Larry, it's okay to go a couple minutes over. Let's. You got a lot of wisdom in that brain of yours.
I got a lot of wishes. Is what I got. So here's what I'd like to sort of say at the end. The cannabis industry has an exceptional opportunity. When most people think of the cannabis industry, the part of it that you hear the most about is based on the word grower. I live in California. We hear about the growers, processors. They're all newly emerging into the conversation. And what we're talking about is how things grow. And what we're talking about is growing hope for the planet in a myriad of ways. And so I would really implore this industry to take the opportunity it has for its coming out party. And I know it's been around a long time, and I know that we've all done an immense amount of work at helping to create what deservedly should be a multi-billion-dollar legal industry. But this is the time when it's coming together. And I would say to you, because you're dependent on agriculture, because you're reaching out to, of course, people as old as me and as young as my daughter, to be customers of this industry. The opportunity for you to not just lead by example, but lead by your voice is huge. It's tremendous. And I would just say, take that amazing gift that you're given and we're all given when we have an opportunity to say something and somebody might actually listen to it, to help create this change. I think it's going to help the industry. It's going to do all the things we talked about, and maybe give us a shot here. And those scientists who all said we had 15 years left and it was game over, every single one of them, if you called them up right now, if we patched them in, they would say, yeah, I'm still listening to the data that say that. But this drawdown thing is making me put an asterisk on it. Maybe we can avoid that. And that would be my final.
Yeah. Wow. Kristen, Larry, brother, sister, thank you so much for that. Really appreciate your wisdom. Everyone in the audience, check them out on LinkedIn, on their websites. We've listed some things and we'll follow up with all in attendance who have registered. Thank you so much. And as they are signing off, I just want to bring up our next panel, which is going to be strategies for indoor and outdoor cultivators to sequester carbon. So a really good transition from the general agriculture and well wishes of the cannabis industry. Now we get to hear from an indoor, a greenhouse, and a sun-grown farmer as to their perspectives on this. And our moderator, who I'd like to introduce for this, is Caitlin Urso. Caitlin is up there, and just an introduction for you, Caitlin. Thank you for joining us. And then you can introduce your panel. But Caitlin is a consultant for small businesses in Colorado from the Public Health and Environment in Denver. She's got 9 years technical environmental experience in mechanical engineering from the University of Colorado. Caitlin rotates through industries to focus on providing proactive environmental assistance to and creating lasting program resources. She specializes in greening the brewing and cannabis industries. In 2017, Caitlin spearheaded the creation of CDPHE's Sustainable Breweries Assistance Program and helped numerous craft brewers focus on reducing environmental impacts. More recently, Caitlin is focused on providing proactive environmental assistance to the cannabis industry to help them become more environmentally friendly, as well as some of the cutting edge research she's done on air quality around growing cannabis. I know, Caitlin, you put out and published, I remember at the symposium last year, a report on VOCs related to cannabis. She's an author of many white papers and has been a speaker at a lot of events. She has been a big supporter of the Cannabis Certification Council and this symposium. So without further ado, thank you all for joining us. Caitlin, welcome. Thank you for introducing the next panel, and I'm going to sign off.
Wonderful. Thank you. That was a great introduction, and I'm really happy to be here. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Happy Earth Day to everyone. I hope you get some time to get outside and away from this virtual world. And I want to thank Larry and Kristen on the panel before us for the great overview of how to apply agricultural best practices to increasing carbon drawdown. They weren't speaking specifically to the cannabis industry, but more just as agriculture as a whole. I really appreciated Kristen rooting cannabis sustainability efforts in soil health in California, as they mostly cultivate outdoors there, versus Colorado. We have a different reality because of our regulatory structure. We primarily grow indoors. Kristen explained that the two carbon sinks on Earth are the ocean or the soil. We want the carbon in the soil, not in the ocean. Larry painted a pretty bleak picture, a data picture for us with an estimated 52 harvests left on Earth with the rate of climate impacts that we're employing on our environment. 1 trillion tons of CO2 has been displaced from our soil to our atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution. We need to start reversing that. Soil health can significantly impact carbon sequestration from the atmosphere to the soil through photosynthesis, something that naturally plants do, a way to naturally help restore our carbon balance. And really just that soil health and traditional principles rooted in biodiversity, little soil disturbance, covering the topsoil and feeding our soil year round are principles that we can take into the cannabis industry. So I really appreciate them highlighting those points. I'm excited today to be talking with our panelists about the impacts of cannabis that has on carbon and ways to not only reduce those carbon impacts through responsible resource use, but actually supporting carbon sequestration at cannabis cultivations through best practices focused on soil health within the industry. When we talk about full carbon impacts or carbon footprint of a business operation, we are essentially quantifying not only the impacts that our on-site operation has, but the impacts of our utilities and of our supply chain. So we're thinking about how much natural resources were burned at the power plant to generate the industry that powers my lights and HVAC at my cultivation. How much greenhouse gas emissions or carbon dioxide equivalent is associated with that power generation? How much energy went into treating my influent water up to municipal drinking water standards to irrigate my warehouse cultivation? Same question for how much an outdoor cultivation utilizes that, comparing it to an outdoor cultivation that utilizes irrigation or natural water supplies. It's thinking about energy and the resulting emissions from manufactured and synthetic fertilizers over leveraging the nutrient value within our own plant waste stream through composting. Also, on the flip side, how much CO2 are my plants converting to oxygen through the action of photosynthesis? How can I reduce the impact of purchasing CO2 for supplemental plant growth? Thinking about ways to localize our supply chain. So essentially at a high level, a carbon footprint takes all the environmental impacts of your business operation and puts them in terms of carbon equivalents to quantify the collective impact that you have on climate change. It's essentially a fancy mathematical journey that ends at identifying operational changes that reduce your impacts. Today, I'm really excited about this panel because we're going to cover the best practices that can be put in place at your cannabis cultivation to not only to reduce your carbon impacts, but enhance sequestration at your grow, whether that's indoor, outdoor, or within a greenhouse. So with that, I'm excited to introduce our panelists. First up is Cassandra. She is the VP of Cultivation for Hava Gardens and was recently named one of the top 50 women in cannabis by High Times Magazine. She has over 2 decades of cultivation leadership experience within regulated markets. Her career has been dedicated to championing high quality, sustainable cannabis practices. She is the creator of Scalable Living Soil Cannabis Cultivation, which provides a sustainable roadmap and comprehensive SOPs for commercial scale indoor and greenhouse cannabis cultivations. Next up on our panel, we have Daniel, who is the co-owner and farmer with his wife, Taylor, at Bryceland Forest Farms, a small diversified cannabis and vegetable farm in Humboldt, California. Daniel has been growing cannabis and veggies for over 25 years and has an educational background in agriculture, engineering, and alternative energy power systems. Him and his farm have been featured in many industry articles, podcasts, and documentaries over the years, as well as being awarded the Regenerative Cannabis Farm Award at the 2017 Emerald Cup. Next up, to round out our panel, we have Sunny, who is passionate about making existing industries more sustainable by encouraging closed loop system design, internal innovation, and drawing inspiration from natural systems. She recognizes the crucial role of ecosystem dynamics to the health of any community. Her background includes environmental policy, soil, ecology, GIS planning, urban planning, food systems, and supply chain management. So we really have a great wealth of knowledge to share with you today. So with that, we'll kick off our panel discussion. That was easy. I was making sure I could work the slides. With identifying the major carbon contributions from the cannabis industry. I think it starts with where you grow. Are you indoor versus are you outdoor? Are you in the high mountain desert of Colorado or the agricultural lands of California? And also how you grow. So with that, I'll kick it off to our panelists. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much for that wonderful introduction for all of us. I know before the panel, Caitlin and Sunny and Daniel and I all got together to really talk about these subjects in depth. It's nice to have farmers from diverse backgrounds because, people on this at this event today are probably from all over the country, right? You're probably growing in different environments, or maybe you're planning on growing in California, or you're planning on growing in Colorado, or it could be on the East Coast in a totally, rainy, damp environment. And so our goal today is to really help give a takeaway for everybody. Really excited to be here. I'd love to talk about even just the differences of microclimates within, we were talking about cultivation in California and versus how that is in a greenhouse, say in Colorado. We can't do all of the regenerative practices that we would like to in Colorado, but we can make it more sustainable. So I'd love to hear from the other panelists too. But that's just for our audience. The three of us come from really different places, but have some really synergistic ideas.
Yeah, I'd love to chime in. And I think when we're looking at cannabis taking that leap from becoming a industry based around prohibition and black markets to an industry that's basically being created in front of our eyes, we have a lot of choices to make. Like if you could go back to the beginning of any industry, how would you want to see it created? And one thing I keep coming back to is we're talking about this indoor versus outdoor versus greenhouse. And you can minimize the impacts of growing indoors and creating a completely manipulated environment that way, but you will never make that something that is actually carbon sequestering. You can only minimize the impact. So as we move into it, we have this this industry and this product and this way of growing that was built around prohibition and has thus created a consumer demand and a habitual way of growing. And the steps that I see as possible is first approaching that to minimize the impacts and make it as sustainable as possible, but really with the goal of influencing industry and legislation so that it is possible for everybody to grow outside and use the sun to grow. And I know that's possible everywhere from Alaska to humid tropical regions without having to resort to using electrical power to recreate the sun indoors. And there's a lot of impediments to that, primarily right now from legislation. But the combination of working for legislation that lets people freely grow in ways that make sense environmentally, and educating consumers to see the overall environmental impacts of the products that they're choosing could really lead us as a new industry into a more sustainable long-term direction.
Indeed. And Caitlin, thank you so much for those introductions. And even just looking at this slide and these bullet points right here, we could spend several days diving into each of them. And really, there's a lot of content here to weave together. And I do want to address, I love the footprint that you had on the opening slide there, the idea of this carbon footprint. Like, the larger your footprint, the more carbon emissions, the higher your carbon emissions are. And so we're here today to talk about how to make that footprint smaller. And then the idea of actually sequestering carbon is like lifting that foot off the ground. So reversing the levels of carbon that you're emitting into the atmosphere. And so soil and like growing plants is really the only way to sequester and reverse that. And so I just want to identify those two different concepts of lightening your emissions versus actually pulling carbon down into the soil. And Daniel, I know, has some really cool slides at the end here to touch on techniques for that. And whether you're growing indoors, in a greenhouse, or outside, it's possible to really to sequester some amount of carbon. And it's all about balancing that with your greater footprint.
Yeah, so I think with that, I think we kind of brought the introductory ideas and the concepts to the table of, your carbon footprint essentially is made up of all of the impacts that your cultivation and your processes, through packaging and retail sale has in making a carbon equivalence. And how, when we talk about reducing that carbon footprint, we have to talk about it within our regulatory boundaries too. And I think Daniel had a really great touch point on that is, here in Colorado, we're kind of stuck with this regulatory structure that moves mostly, us into warehouse growth. So when we're looking at ways to improve, we're looking at ways to improve within the bounds of that regulatory structure. And it's mostly reducing our footprint by, having good energy practices, awareness of our transportation and our packaging methodology, looking at our supply chain challenges, picking our fertilizers, but then when we go into the outdoor cultivation and we get into regenerative and then soil health practices, how that, like you said, lifts that footprint even higher with sequestration. So I think that's a good place for the group to shift the conversation to what are those barriers to carbon reduction for cannabis and what makes cannabis unique. We touched on regulations, I think being one of the largest barriers. I mean, certainly here in Colorado with us growing indoors, and also our location and our climate. It's mid-April right now, it's Earth Day, and we had 6 inches of snow yesterday where I live. It can make interesting, challenging grow environment just based on our natural environment outdoors, and then influence on greenhouses and indoors as well, how we handle our waste. So I'll just shift it back to the panel there. Like, what are some of the unique challenges that cannabis needs to overcome to help with reducing the carbon footprint and getting to this ultimate goal of outdoor regenerative agricultural systems?
Well, one of the first things that we could address, certainly, the lion's share in both, especially in indoor cultivation facilities, but also in some greenhouses, is lighting strategy. And so, it used to be up until really a year and a half ago that LED lighting technology just couldn't compete with the yields that people were getting from their double-ended 1,000-watt high pressure sodium lights. But those 1,000-watt double-ended high pressure sodium lights create an intense amount of heat that needs to be vacated from that facility. And so you have this kind of two-part problem when you choose an inefficient lighting strategy. And of course, the sun being, the most optimal lighting choice you could make, right? But if that's not available to you, or if you have to supplement it, supplementing the sun, which is like, the energy source of life here on Earth, that's a pretty big deal to try to replicate that for both plant health and yield, and also environmental responsibility indoors. So luckily, LED lighting technology has improved quite a bit. So as cultivators are choosing to look at the first way to minimize carbon footprint, if you're growing indoors or in a greenhouse, that would be to evaluate LED lighting. And then that in turn will it should reduce your energy use by about 40% right there. But then you get this additional 10 or 15% savings because you don't constantly have to account for cooling all the heat that those lights are putting out that can't be used in your garden. So that right there is one of the first things that I look at.
I have a point to make it as far as location and climate too, if you're someone that's considering getting into cannabis cultivation and have somewhat of flexibility in choosing where that's going to happen, to really understand what resources you have there on site, what the local climate is, and understand how this plant grows and where it comes from. Like, every plant has evolved to grow in a certain climate, and cannabis happens to moderate humidity and lots of sun and temperate temperatures, and we all are where we are. And if you're in a place like that's extra humid, maybe in the South or the Northeast or in Colorado where it gets really cold, just understanding that you're going to be working with those components of your local climate and how you can best minimize your carbon needs, your energy needs. One that's really simple that I tell people all the time when they're thinking about getting into cultivation or developing a site is, do you have 3-phase power available? It's, if you're going to need energy, it's much more efficient when you're going to be operating equipment, lights, etc. So your ultimate power demand is actually much lower. So considerations like these when you're choosing both a site and what climate you're going to be operating in, and every state, every region has microclimates within it, and just to be thoughtful about that before you blaze on with a project. And of course, regulations are part of that, and what the city or county is allowing and permitting. And I know there's plenty of places, especially in new markets, maybe where they're not comfortable with outdoor growing or with greenhouse growing for for whatever reason, security, odor, et cetera. And I think as the market matures too, that and there's more trust, that a lot of those regulations will be loosened up a little bit. So part of it too just comes back to being a good neighbor, being a good citizen, and advocating for this plant and this industry with regulators.
Yeah, I really agree strongly with what Sunny just said about really taking a look at where you are. If you're choosing to start a new cultivation operation, and you're somewhere where you don't have the option to do that outside, maybe consider going somewhere else. The regulations will change, and we don't want to make really unsustainable decisions right now that will affect our planet for generations to come. I mean, we don't grow bananas in Wisconsin. It's less energy intensive to transport them there than to create an environment to grow them. Cannabis, luckily, you can grow in most environments we would find ourselves in. The difference is you might not be able to have 3 or 4 or 5 harvests during a year. So if you are in an environment where it's still snowing in April, if your regulations allow you to grow outside, you might have one harvest that won't be as big as somewhere who has a longer growing season. But luckily cannabis stores real well. So a lot of the places, to me, that the high energy intensity of indoor cultivation might make sense is if you need fresh lettuce in Denmark or something that there's just not really a way to grow that other than using fossil fuels and using energy intensive ways to create an indoor environment. There's season extension in greenhouses that are unheated, and ways to do that small market gardeners have been doing for years. But with cannabis, it will minimize the amounts of profit you can make off of a given area. But I really think we're at the point where we're choosing sustainable industry when you are starting up an industry. If you are choosing to start a cultivation operation, think about whether you want to start it somewhere that you are unable to use the sun to grow.
Thank you so much for that. So with that, let's shift, which I think you did a pretty good job of. And Daniel, I'll give you the first crack to round out any other advice you have on this topic, as well as best practices to reduce carbon impacts, no matter where you grow. And some of the concepts I think we've already touched on is, certainly the hierarchy is grow outdoors if you can. If you can't, shoot for a greenhouse. If not, warehouse grows. At least try to optimize, essentially start with your energy, with that being your largest impact. But any other advice that the panelists can speak to on best ways to reduce carbon impacts, specifically for the cannabis industry?
I mean, I would think that if you are thinking about a warehouse grow, thinking about the grid you are tying to and where that energy comes from. If you're doing a warehouse grow that's tied to a coal-fired power plant, it would be a lot different than your carbon impact if it's coming from hydroelectric or wind power or something like that. And then in terms of just general efficiency, insulation, other things that I'm not the expert in, and I'll definitely leave the other panelists to talk about. But then even within any context of a grow, you can think about all the other factors, systems that you have involved, whether, for instance, we use a lot of electric tools rather than gasoline powered tools that have rechargeable batteries. Think about your packaging and all those other ways to minimize it. But I mean, I just keep going back to the idea that the best way to minimize your carbon impact is to use the abundant energy that the sun has and maybe not grow when the sun's not available.
There was a note on the last slide and some, relevant to a few of these about equipment costs and just doing it for the people that might have to grow in a greenhouse or indoors for whatever reason, to do your research and try to find efficient equipment that is going to last. There's maybe you could find a light fixture or a fan that's like a little bit more affordable, but it's actually going to need to be replaced sooner. And so there's a component of waste there. And when you look at the carbon footprint, you really holistically, you're even tracing back to where was this product made and what kind of emissions were used to create that and how did it get here. It's really, to me, like it's a mindset of a worldview, how you're looking at how everything's connected. And I want to point out that a lot of utilities have really great rebate programs for more energy efficient equipment or even like design measures. And so again, to do your research and if you're at a place where you haven't chosen a location or a property yet, to think about what your local utility is able to provide there. We have some clients that are able to get the cost of an LED light down to $250, $300 a fixture, which is less than HPS. So there's, in many cases, there's like a business argument behind going more efficient when you're looking at both the initial cost and then also your operating costs. So just a tip for those that are not able to grow outdoors. And I do agree with Daniel, like if you can grow outdoors under the sun and seasonally, that is hands down the most environmentally friendly approach and to have the lowest carbon footprint as well.
And to bounce off of equipment inputs, and then also just the, we classify them as consumables, things that we're purchasing every month. That can be fertilizers, right? So a cultivation strategy that's using minimally processed natural ingredients, like you can get a bag of kelp that has been essentially sourced from the ocean, dried in one place, put in, packaged in a recycled paper bag, and then shipped to you. That's one example of outside nutrition coming to your facility. Of course, you can do a bunch of things with if you have access to sourcing or growing all of your nutrients on your own property, as I believe, Daniel may do, that's a best case scenario. But if you can't do that, then look at what are the things that I'm purchasing every month? What are the things that I'm, using? What are the things I'm throwing away? A lot of the synthetic fertilizers that people use, no matter how like heady the logo is and how much hype is behind that particular brand, a lot of these inputs are just sourced from the oil and gas industry. So if we're going to talk about carbon footprint, so that was drilled out of the earth. Usually that site itself has, pretty poor air quality, issues with water usage in the case of fracking. And, so at the site, there was damage and carbon impact. Then that gets shipped to a chemical plant to be processed into one iteration of the fertilizer. It will usually go to another, packaging facility or a couple before it's bottled, and then it's sent to you. Sometimes, a lot of the nutrients that you would buy from Holland, they're fracked out of the ground somewhere, and they're shipped to Europe, and they take this whole journey before they come to us here in the States. And so when you really wrap around your head around what journey your consumables have taken, the fertilizers you're using, down to the scissors you're using, the fans, the lighting, we're sourcing from all over the world. So trying to reduce that net and source locally wherever possible and to reduce the journey that everything takes on its way to you, I think is really huge.
Yeah, I just want to add a little something to what Cassandra was saying is, most outdoor growers in Humboldt and that I'm aware of still use potting soil, bagged soil, or bulk, and amendments similar to what you're talking about. And one thing I've been thinking a lot about lately is not only how far things come from, but the closer you can get, especially the larger inputs, like a potting soil that comes across the country for a grow is going to have a much larger carbon impact than a 1 gallon bottle of fish emulsion or something like that. And so trying to source some of the larger inputs, especially locally, is key, and encouraging that local industry, encouraging the local soil industry to become bulk rather than bagged, and to move away from things like peat moss and coconut coir that are imported from far away, and rely more on, like here locally we have redwood bark that's made into a peat moss substance, but pushing some of those the bigger inputs, and maybe they're only one time and it'll last for years, but still the carbon footprint of them because of their mass for transportation is so huge.
Yeah, those are great points. I thank you everyone for touching on, on-site best management practices as well as supply chain. I want to shift and address an interesting question that came in through our questions box from Todd about supplemental CO2, essentially saying, if we're trying to minimize our negative footprint, why are we adding CO2 into the cultivation, and why aren't we banning that practice? And I think that's a very interesting question, because the whole reason why we bring CO2 into an indoor environment is we are optimizing plant growth, manipulating the environment even beyond what's provided in an outdoor cultivation. We're condensing the lifespan of that plant to the same growth output in maybe 2 to 4 months time, and an indoor cultivation versus maybe a 6 to 9 month outdoor growing season. And so with condensing that lifespan of the plant still needs all the same ingredients for life that it would get in that expanded time frame. It needs CO2 for photosynthesis. It needs extra nutrients. It needs water. And under these intense lighting schemes that we create for indoor cannabis environments, the plants actually can't perform up to absorbing all the light that we provide to them through our lighting fixtures, unless we bring up that supplemental level of CO2 in order for the plants to be able to utilize that much light in such a condensed time frame, essentially. So by adding in supplemental CO2, as long as you're balancing your light and your CO2 supplementation optimally, you can actually reduce your overall energy footprint and increase your space utilization and production at an indoor environment. So in an indoor environment, when we have a sealed HVAC system where we're not constantly discharging the CO2 that we're bringing into our environment, and we're keeping it to certain levels that optimize photosynthesis, we can actually utilize all of the light that we're providing a little bit more efficiently. So that's a great question. Does any of the other panelists want to talk about supplemental CO2? I guess the one thing I could add to that too is thinking about also the supply chain of your CO2 and where it comes from. Is it, generated on site by you actually, burning natural gas on site to generate that CO2? Or is that CO2 coming on a truck from far distances, but maybe you can choose to have CO2 that's generated as a byproduct of power generation at a power plant? We did a really cool project here in Colorado where we actually diverted, we captured the CO2 footprint that was CO2 emissions coming off of a local brewery, Denver Beer Co., from their fermentation tanks, captured it, compressed it on site, and then brought it to a local cannabis cultivation to be released as their supplemental CO2. to localize that supply chain of CO2. The CO2 was only traveling 7 miles from the brewery to the marijuana cultivation to be utilized. So.
And Caitlin, like that's one of the coolest things. And I know one of your specialties, you specialize both in cannabis and in breweries and making both more sustainable. And right now, because of, you know, the legality or lack of federal legality of cannabis, I know that it can be touchy in some areas to say locate a brewery right next to a grow. But I think moving forward and as the industry expands, solutions like that and symbiotic relationships between different types of businesses could be really cool. There could be some really great opportunities there to localize supply chain and to take waste from one business and use it right next door at a grow and vice versa. So
absolutely. I think one of the greatest opportunities I see for that with the cannabis industry is with the fibers that are produced. Most of the cannabis industry is focused on the buds because that's where the cannabinoids are concentrated. But in the process of creating those cannabinoids, you're growing really long, strong, great fibers in all of the stalks and stems as well. And so could we start to see a localized fiber market for papers, plastics, clothing? I'm excited to see that as an opportunity for the industry. So I think that's been a good conversation about best management practices. I think we can start to talk about numbers a little bit. So with that, I'll hand it off to Sunny and then to Cassandra to kind of talk a little bit about some of the numbers behind these practices that we're discussing.
Thank you, Caitlin. So this, I just wanted to show you guys to make a case and just put some numbers in front of you about the different energy consumption habits, if you will, of different structures. So we could maybe perhaps use outdoor growing as a baseline of basically having zero energy consumption. And what we're looking at here, this is all tied to climate control in the cultivation. So it has nothing to do with, your processing or your administration offices or anything like that. So looking apples to apples at like the footprint of where you're growing plants. So at the bottom here, we have an indoor grow that is going to, and this is for 3,000 square feet of a footprint of a grow facility, about 600,000 kilowatt hours per year of consumption. That's a huge amount. You're not getting any benefit of the sun to help grow the plants. So running all supplemental lighting and HVAC systems to warm up the environment or cool it, depending on where the building is. And then the standard design, so this is actually, it's a greenhouse. I pulled this from the series website if anyone wants to play around. There's an energy calculator. So this would be a standard polycarbonate greenhouse with no insulation. There's going to be, you can, on the left side, you can see the savings versus the consumption, that's going to have about 40% less energy consumption than an indoor. Whereas what we have called the series design and what makes it different from a standard poly greenhouse is that you have an insulated north wall and east and west end wall. So it's a passive solar design based on, at certain latitudes in the Northern Hemisphere, the lower 48 states, that the roof pitch is designed to capture as much of the sun during the winter and a minimal amount during the summer. So you're using solar heat gain when it's cold out and minimizing that gain in the summer. So it's the idea of designing around your natural resources, this one being the sun, to be as efficient as possible. And so really just wanted to show some numbers about potential energy savings here just by design. This has, very little to do with equipment choice at all. These are all assuming LEDs as well. So when you put in like HPS or HIDs, of course, the numbers are going to go up even further. Yeah, so if you could go to the next slide, Caitlin, we can go inside of that greenhouse. So this is the top greenhouse from the previous slide, the most efficient a greenhouse could be. So what I really wanted to show here was what are the major consumers of energy in that facility, and it's about 50-50 HVAC and your supplemental lighting. You have circulation fans, of course, and pumps for fertigation perhaps or irrigation, but it's really, there's two categories where I think we can really focus to bring down the carbon impact, or your carbon consumption. So yeah, I think I want to hand it over then to Cassandra to talk a little bit about the difference between different LEDs fixtures and different HPS fixtures, because that's kind of a best case scenario. How efficient could a controlled climate be? And yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Sunny. And it is so interesting to see how just that pitch of the roof and the insulated north wall can make all the difference. And so, we just throw around the term greenhouse, but that means something so different depending on the product that you're getting and what you're designing. And I think another component with that, just that came to mind was, that yes, although we can technically grow cannabis in all of our 48 states and Alaska and Hawaii, obviously as well, the microbial regulations are very, very strict state to state. And so, what you can achieve in a really cool or damp climate, a climate that favors mold and mildew, gosh, it's amazing to stand in one of those really high-tech greenhouses in the middle of winter in an environment that would otherwise totally suck to be out in, and just how comfortable it can feel with minimal energy input. So thank you so much for that. So I love, this is from Thrive Agritech, this slide, and this is an example of an LED HPS comparison. And this does not always necessarily include rebates. So like Sunny was saying, there are some really amazing rebates out there. It just depends on what electrical company you're working with. And sometimes it can even just take a little bit of time to work with a new energy company that's getting used to the cannabis industry, to create or invest in rebates. But that's something that we're seeing pop up across the country. But I love Thrive Agritech because they're an LED manufacturer that's always been really, really transparent. So anyways, thanks to Thrive. And they have great products. So we're looking at the upfront cost here of LEDs versus HPS. Now you can get some pretty cheap HID lights. But when we look at the energy consumption, I mean, it's 60% higher, right? Or more, 70% higher. And so when you see, okay, like what's this upfront cost is going to be, double-ish, you could prepare for that. What you're not seeing here is then you need a whole lot less HVAC or tons of cooling to take care of the HPS heating from the bulb. But even if we're not adding that to the equation, you can see how much energy you're using that first year. And then the maintenance, right? Because the bulbs need to be replaced frequently, and every grower has a different idea about exactly how many harvests they can get in with those bulbs. But everyone agrees that at least once a year you should be replacing those bulbs. Well, that costs a lot of money. So if you're just thinking about this in financial terms, it's costly to maintain these. But additionally, the carbon footprint for creating these HID bulbs is quite high. So we usually see in the first year and a half, complete payback from energy and maintenance savings, which is great. And if we could go to the next slide. Yeah, so then how this translates to carbon footprint. So using that same model that Thrive came up with in the last slide, which is it's a pretty small grow. It's a typical indoor 60 by 60 flowering canopy, and then supporting veg space, just through switching to LEDs instead of high pressure sodium or and metal halide for veg. You're saving 445,000 pounds of CO2 a year, which they show being equivalent to roughly 55 acres of forest. I don't know that I'd say added per year, but let's say, that it's the presence of 55 acres of forest is basically what you're saving every year. Well, that's a pretty compelling, visceral cost, because as Larry was saying, when you go into a forest on the last panel, when you go into a forest, you feel so refreshed. And so just imagine what you're taking away when you choose that HID strategy above LED. It's pretty big. So if you want to make it tangible, think of that 55 acres of forest in a relatively small grow. So, again, that's just with the bulbs. HVAC in an indoor environment is really interesting because you have to control for a lot of heat being taken out of those indoor rooms, but also humidity. So humidity is really huge. In that indoor space, you're running dehumidifiers all the time to keep your environment stable. Again, because we have really strict mold and mildew regulations, we need to make sure that very little biology is growing on the buds of the plants that we grow. And so, for overall plant health, but also to mitigate microbial growth on the actual plant material itself, you're going to spend a lot of money and energy controlling your humidity in your environment. So I do grow indoors and in greenhouses. So I'm the VP of Hava Gardens, and we have a killer greenhouse on the western slope of Colorado. And the western slope is a wonderful environment. It's Red Rocks desert kind of area. And it's great for growing cannabis in a greenhouse. We get a lot of cold, hot fluctuations on the shoulder seasons, but we get sun for most of the year. But whether I'm growing indoors or outdoors, I'm going to grow in raised living soil beds. And that's sort of a plug to talk about what I do with living soil. But more than anything, I just want to let folks know that it is possible to do a living soil greenhouse. And by that, I mean, you don't throw your soil away. You have raised beds that you care for. You make sure that you are a good steward of soil health. And so no toxic inputs. You're feeding the beneficial biology in the soil. And you can achieve really competitive yields and really, really high quality on a commercial scale doing living soil. You don't need to throw your soil away. You don't need to send it to the landfill. At Hava Gardens, we have a roughly 40,000 square foot facility, and we save 648,000 pounds of soil from the landfill, or even from having to be composted, and buying new soil every single year. And so this reduces our carbon footprint through, reduced transportation. Just like Daniel was saying earlier, it's we're sourcing the soil one time, and we're not continuously just drawing soil from across the country, on trucks to feed our operation. So For us, it comes in once, we continue to use it, and then we don't need to worry about sending it to the landfill and getting new stuff in. So that's one of those like big, bulky, heavy costs that we've mitigated just through taking care of our soil like soil was meant to be cared for. So people are doing this on a commercial scale. Not everybody is great at this point doing it successfully, but certainly with the companies that I've been working with over the last 15 years, the soil in the first garden I set up in Colorado is still there. So even though I've moved on. So that's just something that I'm putting out there just to let you know. Another component is being mindful of synthetic fertilizer application and how that increases greenhouse gas emissions. One factoid we don't really talk about much is that in addition to CO2, nitrous oxide accounts for, even though it's just 6% of our greenhouse gas emissions, it's almost 300 times more powerful than CO2 and remains in the atmosphere for about 100 years. So what happens when we over apply that nitrogen, synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, is that oftentimes it gets broken down by microbes. And even if you're growing in semi-dead soil, it breaks down relatively quickly, is released into the atmosphere. Now, synthetic nitrogen is pretty cheap, so farmers usually just huck some more on there, and and they don't really notice the impact of that nitrous oxide dissipating into the atmosphere and what that actually does. So switching to organic nutrients is important because microbes and plants are breaking that down at a speed that the plants can actually consume, rather than just either gassing those nutrients out or having them drip off in runoff to another location, into our waterways, etc. So that also brings me to the importance of micro irrigation. It's really, really important to make sure that you're not just saturating your soil. People talk a lot about the importance of flushing. When you're using organic nutrients, you don't really have to flush all the nutrients out of your soil at the end of your harvest cycle. You can pretty much allow the natural plant and microbial activity to provide steady quantities of soil nutrition, and you don't want to leach your soil of all that fertility and microbe food, and your plants are not overfed. So if you're using smart amounts of water and fertilizer, you can also dramatically increase the amount of fertilizer you're using and also the amount of water you're using as well.
Thank you for that. So I think we've had a lot of great lessons learned talking about, within an indoor environment, all the opportunities that we have to reduce energy usage. Primarily, our biggest low-hanging fruit is with our lighting and our HVAC, and switching to LEDs, which reduces both, and then moving into a greenhouse situation and focusing on nutrient health and soil health. And now I'm really excited to have Daniel share, in a fully outdoor environment, which is essentially what we're trying to mimic with a greenhouse and with an indoor warehouse. What we're trying to mimic that natural environment, and sometimes optimize it even further with, like I mentioned, pushing an indoor grow environment to having more harvest per year and faster production rates. I'm excited to hear from Daniel about the practices they have at his farm and some of the opportunities they have, given that they're fully outdoor in a fertile area.
Hey, thank you, Caitlin. I just wanted to thank Cassandra for what she was saying too, and just add on to the living soil thing and the natural buffering capability of living soil. It's like when you're dealing with salt nutrients, you have to get your ratios just right. It has to be flushed. And living soil, there's this natural intelligence where you add things in a balanced way, and the diversity and kind of the intelligence of everything that's in that soil gets to balance it all out. And it's a good feeling as a grower that it's a lot harder to really screw things up as an organic grower because it's not just relying on your calculations and your intelligence, but on a balanced natural system. But yeah, so talking a little bit about our farm, we actually do some not greenhouse production. We use greenhouses. There's one behind me over there that's the nursery for our cannabis. Some unheated greenhouses, and have it's a mixed light license in California, even though we don't light supplement at all, and do about half of our operation we do 2 harvests a year from, even though it's in native soil, and uncovered greenhouses, hoops just for doing light deprivation on. But talking mostly about carbon, when we talk about actually sequestering carbon and not just slowing down the carbon for climate change, but sequestering it and trying to reverse this, photosynthesis is the tool. Photosynthesis is the driver. When you look at a plant, it is literally made out of carbon from the atmosphere that the sun provided the power for that plant to pull carbon out of the atmosphere and put into a physical form. So for us, when we look at photosynthesis, we're looking at a few different things on it. We're looking at optimizing photosynthesis, extending photosynthesis, and then converting the products created by it into stable soil carbon, because you can create a lot of plant biomass with photosynthesis, and if you deal with it wrong, it'll be put right back into the atmosphere again through a decomposition process. So optimizing photosynthesis, the living soils, having soil that is rich in diversity optimizes photosynthesis. Plants can get what they want. They are never lacking for it. They grow well, have access to minerals, the soil has a water holding capability, so it's not dependent on you for water. It can reach what it needs. When we talk about extending photosynthesis, you can look at these slides. If you go back one slide, so growing cannabis outdoors, cannabis changes a lot over the course of the season. It starts out as a small plant, becomes in our garden 10, 12 feet wide, 10, 12 feet tall. So there's all this open space to have photosynthesis happen during the process. So in these slides, you can see we have beds in between our cannabis that we crop veggies for our market from. And then as the cannabis continues to grow, we turn those into cover crop beds for building soil and for beneficial flowers for part of our IPM program. And then eventually the cannabis fills in that space. So we're not leaving spaces of bare soil that don't take advantage of that natural light for photosynthesis. And then if you go to the next slide, during the off season, when we're not able to grow cannabis because of the climate here, which is half to more than half of the year, we choose species that can grow in that area and photosynthesize during the winter here, to continue to pull carbon out of the atmosphere. And so these cover crops that we grow during the winter are not only a way to continue to photosynthesize and put carbon from the atmosphere into the soil, but also a way to build up our soil fertility. And in that middle slide, you can see one of the processes we're doing to take that and to maximize the conversion of that biomass is by crimping. So we're taking that cover crop, we're laying it down flat by crimping it, and then covering it with compost and with the next year's mulch. And what that does is it allows it to break down slowly through more of a fungal and like macrobiology, earthworms and things like that process, rather than a hot compost that would be created through bacterial. action, and a hotter compost will release more of that carbon back into the atmosphere, whereas a slower composting process that focuses more on fungal activity and macrobiology actually puts more of the carbon back into the soil. And then the picture on the far right back there is rhizobium. It is nitrogen fixing bacterial colonies on the roots of the cover crops. So a big part of the carbon equation is, as Cassandra was talking about, these chemical fertilizers that are part of the fossil fuel industry. The natural nitrogen cycle is a cycle that is completely dependent on this planet on legumes and the relationship between leguminous plants and nitrogen fixing bacteria that colonize their roots. And you can grow organically and still be part of the chemical nitrogen cycle. If you're growing organically, but say using a blood meal or a chicken manure or some kind of a nitrogen fertilizer that is animals that were fed from the chemical nitrogen cycle. So we have a goal of providing as much of the nitrogen we can on our farm through the natural nitrogen cycle, to try to get back to not burning fossil fuel to create nitrogen fertility for our farm. And then I think on the next slide, we get into more of that, like the picture on the left is just as plants are transitioning into flower, there's a buckwheat cover crop that provides some bee forage and soil building in between, and those plants will eventually grow in. And on the right, talking about closing loops, taking what you have, and I believe it was mentioned before, not everybody has a lot of abundance on their property, or that they have access to in a close area to their property, but we for this compost pile that we make on the right, which is the primary fertility for our veggie and our cannabis farm, comes primarily from animals that are here, but we also source manure from a local organic dairy that's close, and get brew waste from a local brewery that we provide produce for as well, and kind of seeking biomass and inputs. There's a lot of waste around us. So that idea, like the brewery that you were talking about, creating carbon dioxide that then can be used in a grow operation, and those kinds of relationships, to close loops, not just within your own farm, but within your community in general, seeing waste streams that are opportunities to bring it back around and turn a waste stream into an abundance that can be used. And then another thing we've focused a lot on with our farm is the biodiversity and diversifying our farm in terms of not just growing cannabis as well. We really feel like it's hard to have a healthy growing operation or a healthy farm that focuses just on one crop, and without having an economic incentive to grow other crops, it's also hard to put the time and energy into growing them. So we've really focused a lot of our energy. I would say we're about 10-1 as far as the area we have growing veggies to the area we have growing cannabis, and they work really well together. As you saw in those first slides, the vegetables, especially the early spring vegetables, grow well with the cannabis. We have income early in the season from our vegetable and CSA operations versus the cannabis income coming later after harvest in the fall. And it also can reduce some of our carbon impact by providing lower carbon choices for our community, for being able to choose food and nutrition that comes locally and is grown in a way that minimizes the carbon impact.
Thank you so much for that. So we had really great conversations today. We may not have addressed all of the questions that we were seeking to address, but that's okay because there was lots to talk about. If we didn't get to your questions in the chat, hopefully we'll get those answered and can touch base with you after this. Thanks everybody that joined in and to our panelists. Happy Earth Day. And with that, I will hand it back over to Ben Gill.
Thank you, Caitlin. As always, such a pleasure to have you under our auspices and working with us and just sharing your general knowledge, expertise, and lovely personality. So thank you, big thank you to Caitlin Urso. And of course, thank you to Cassandra and Daniel and Sunny and really everybody today. Thank you to our audience. Thank you to our sponsors. Usually when I come on at the end of the show, that means we are done. So please go out and do something good for the earth today and do it tomorrow and the next day, because really every day should be Earth Day. So from us at the Cannabis Certification Council, thank you so much for joining us and for supporting us and for doing your part to drive sustainable best practices in cannabis and beyond. Thanks all so much. And we will see you next time in May. All right, y'all. Happy birthday.
Thank you guys.